very lucky today. We've got a special guest lecturer for you. Will Saunders has had what I would describe as a kind of portfolio career. He's moved through a number of successful editorial and production type of roles in the media, including a very successful career within the BBC. And Will has now moved on to private consultation, helping universities and businesses with their media challenges. So without further ado, I'll let Will tell you about the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I just ask, are the people in this room, are you all interested in a career in the media, generally? Can I ask some of you, what are you studying? Can I ask?
Journalism and creative writing.
Journalism and creative writing. What are you studying?
Media and publishing.
Media and publishing. What about you?
Mass communications, and then I have journalism as well, and also media publishing as well.
Okay. What is it you actually want from people like me in terms of advice? Do you just want to hear how I did it? Do you want to hear how to do it? Do you want to hear there's no money in it? What do you want to hear? What's most useful to you today? Go on.
How you stand out.
How you stand out?
Yeah.
Okay.
How you...
Go on.
How you worked up the ladder to executive producer.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else? What is it you want to know? Because I don't want to waste your time.
Sorry, I know you worked in radio, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So maybe how to get work experiences and stuff, how to
Okay.
approach companies for work experiences.
All right. Anyone else got anything they really want to know today?
The reality of the industry, what we as a student expect and what it really is.
Great. Okay, look, I have quite a bespoke presentation that I do from time to time, and we'll race through that, right, as quick as we can. And after that, it might raise some questions. Hopefully, I hope it does, and it might raise some opportunities and some thoughts. And we'll talk about that after. And I will answer, and we'll make sure there's time. I'll answer every single question you have. And it can be about you, it can be about anything, but just bear with me whilst I go through this, all right? So this is a presentation that I did for BBC Worldwide. I've done this for Spotify in Stockholm, and I've done this for a variety of other international broadcasters. And I've just taken that slide, think outside it. That was an advert that I put in Marketing Week, all right? And we did this to try and find a new lead to run a team, because most of the business I was engaged in was essentially around television, right? And very, very lucrative IP. Now, a lot of changes are happening in the business right now, but television's still an incredibly lucrative business to be in. And I didn't find myself in television because I really wanted to. It's just kind of how I navigated through what I did. So in terms of where you are now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've done, and that isn't because I want to show I'm the big I am, but I want to show you how you can make best use of the opportunities around you, right? Now, I don't know how old you all are, but that's me when I was 20, all right? And that's the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Some of you do you know who the Reverend Jesse Jackson is? No? Okay. The Reverend Jesse Jackson was one of the most influential civil rights leaders in the United States, and very high up in the Democratic Party, close friend of Barack Obama, and I studied American Studies. That's my degree, right? I have a degree in American Studies. Completely useless, right? Has no vocational value whatsoever. I was just terrified that when I was doing my English A-level, that I wouldn't get a good enough grade to study English at university. And I really hated Middle English. I despised Chaucer, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one. And so I realised the only way I could get to study stuff I wanted to was try and find a culture where I wouldn't have to study anything that happened before 1700. So I did a degree in American Studies. And back then, very lucky, the local education authority paid for you to have your third year in the United States. So I studied, first of all in Colorado for 5 months, and then in Chicago for 5 months. And because generally British universities have a higher standard of education than a lot of American universities, we were racing ahead of the American students when we were there. And when I was in Chicago, I was told you don't have to go to classes in the afternoon, right? So you can do what you like. And I blagged my way by writing, by phoning, to the big AM talk radio station in Chicago. There was an FM AM split. The FM was a dance music station. Back then, that was Bobby Brown. And the AM was a talk station, right? Their job was to make money. They couldn't play records because of their service license. So what they did was they talked, and they talked and talked and talked until the phone lines started flashing, and then you had a show. And I worked with a cameraman from San Francisco called Art Cribbs. And Art was studying to be a priest. And in the time he had in between studying to be a priest, he ran this drive time talk show from 2 till 6. And at the time, the mayoral elections were happening in Chicago. And the mayor of Chicago is a big deal, right? American mayors generally, it's a big deal. It's a very powerful job. So they had a kind of divisive race for the mayor, which was between a kind of rainbow candidate and a guy whose dad was the mayor. And the job in hand when I was there was to get the vote out. Jesse Jackson came in every day for a week on the show urging people to vote, as did Minister Louis Farrakhan. And when you're 20 and you're the kind of, I think I was pretty much the only white guy allowed on the show, because they said because of my accent I could answer the phones because the audience wouldn't know if I was black or white, right? So that was a life-changing experience for me. That meant after doing that, I so wanted to work in radio. That was the big thing, right? I was 20 years old, got back to the UK, took me 3 years to find a job in what I wanted to do. In that time, I ran a warehouse for Burton's Menswear, and I ran restaurants, and I did all the shit jobs you're going to do, and probably do, just to pay to go through college, right? But I did make it to radio, and I got on a traineeship. And the reason I got the traineeship, I was told, was because I told them in the interview that I'd actually lifted a suit from the Burton's Menswear warehouse that day to the interview, and I was going to put it back in the warehouse that night and sell it again. And they thought, oh, he's all right, he's a bit of character. And I was non-Oxbridge. I think I was one of their non-Oxbridge candidates that year. And my big dream was to work for Radio 1. And I grew up in the middle of the country. I grew up where there was one bus a week to the local town on a Friday at 11 o'clock. It took 90 minutes to get into town. You had an hour in town, then you had a 90-minute bus ride home. So I spent most of my teenage years listening to radio and watching television, trying to understand how they made it. And my big dream was to work for Radio 1. And in 1995, I made it to Radio 1, and within 8 weeks, I produced the Christmas #2 hit single in 1995, which was called Wonderwall by the Mike Flowers Pops. Has anyone heard it? Please look it up on YouTube. It's a thing of art. It was kept off the #1 that year by Michael Jackson's Earth Song, right? He might be dead, but to this day, I bear a hell of a grudge, all right? I hate that song. I'll turn that song off if I hear it. It was all to do with the speed with which record companies could export singles into the market. Our single was signed, turned around and released in about 3-4 weeks. And Michael Jackson's record label were determined that they wouldn't get beaten off the #1 spot. So in the last 2 weeks, in the run up to Christmas, they discounted the single, which meant we couldn't, no matter how much we shipped it, we couldn't get it into the #1 spot. Music industry's bent, just so you know. Then I left. I hated it. After a year, my dream job turned out to be a nightmare. I just didn't enjoy it. It just wasn't what I wanted it to be. So I left. I went around the world with my wife, girlfriend then. Came back, realised, do you know what? Actually, maybe it was just where I was. That maybe it's radio there that was wrong. Maybe it wasn't radio per se. So I went back. I picked up the afternoon shows on Radio 1 with 2 DJs called Mark and Lard, and they'd done the breakfast show. They were kicked off the breakfast show. They were brilliant, trust me, they were absolutely world class. They just couldn't rate at breakfast, so they were moved to the afternoons. And I picked them up at the afternoon show, and we won Sony Radio Gold Awards, we won NME Awards, we put on 1.26 million listeners, but my proudest claim to fame about working with Mark and Lard was that we were all big Man City fans. Now back then, Man City were really shit, all right? And we were in the old 3rd division, and that meant we were playing teams like Halifax Town and Doncaster Rovers in the FA Cup. But the club approached us and said, look, you're good for profile, And we're currently discounting our footballers. Did you know you can sponsor footballers? So if you're a company, you can sponsor a footballer for a season and your name goes in the programme alongside the footballer. And my biggest claim to fame, and the thing I'm proudest of, is that we sponsored Manchester City's left-back, Danny Tiatto, for a whole season. And every 2 weeks in the programme, Danny Tiatto was brought to you in association with Radio 1's Mark and Lard. I got so bollocked for that, because that was not supposed to be how you should spend licence fee payers' money. But it cost 400 quid, so why was I going to say no? Sometimes you do things you shouldn't do for very good reason. And I have a much better story now than like, how many years ago was that, right? But that's a great story now, and I loved doing that, and I don't care I got told off for it. A few years after that, I got bored with music radio because they tell you what to play. It's all programmed, and it's programmed now probably much worse than it was when I was there. And you kind of get in between, you get fixated with the bits in between the records rather than the records. And I loved music, and I was very lucky to work with some amazing bands and meet some amazing people. But in the end, it wasn't the music, it was the bits you could do in between. And that led me into another career, and I ended up in comedy. And I was a comedy producer for quite a while. And in 2005, I made a series with these guys. Do you know Flight of the Conchords? Yeah, you know who they are? Okay. It took us 2 years to get a show off the ground with these guys. They are, in my opinion, the best at what they do. They're based in New Zealand. They came over to the UK to do festivals. We got them a spot on a show. Then I got them to let me record a gig, and we did a mini pilot. We were convinced there is no way anyone with a brain would turn these guys down for a show. But they did. And it took us a whole year to get that project back off the ground. I had to fly the controller of Radio 2 up to Edinburgh. She had to go for a meeting to sack a DJ or something. And then she came to the gig with me, saw them, and then said, look, whatever you want to do with them, go and do it, right? And that had been after a year of not getting anywhere with another radio network. It took so long to get this right, but because you believed in it, and because they're the most incredible talent, it was worth doing. So I ended up in comedy, first in radio, then in TV. In fact, I produced the biggest comedy outside broadcast from the Edinburgh Fringe across one night. I think it was like 70 live stand-up acts. We had a power cut. We had a comedian get all his kit off, so I had live full frontal nudity on television. And I had a stage protest, which meant that after that I decided I don't think I want to stay in television for much longer. Actually, what happened was I started to become aware of what you could do online. And around this time, things were starting to happen. Interesting things were starting to happen in terms of digital media. American website called Funny or Die. Does anyone know Funny or Die? Right, Will Ferrell, and they'd launched in the UK. And our problem at the BBC was that our feeder channel for all of our stand-ups was a radio network called Radio 4. I don't know how many of you listen to Radio 4, but the average age of the Radio 4 listener is somewhere around 55 plus. The average aspiring young British comedian is somewhere about 23 to 26. So there's a disparity there. So we pitched and won the chance to develop a comedy platform for the BBC. The job was to develop new forms of IP, to create new TV shows from the ground up. Right? And we had some success, but this is where the majesty of working online really hit for me. And I'm going to play you a clip of something that we developed. Right? So this was one of the comedy things we did. See if you like it. You like that?
Yeah.
Right. We developed what we called a disaggregated sketch show. And that's written by these guys, the Dawson brothers. Amazing writers. They now do most of David Walliam's stuff. They do a lot of stuff for Jonathan Ross. Back then, they were aspiring comedy writers, and we also brought comedy writers over from the States to work with us. The theory being, you make a sketch show work by releasing it onto YouTube in miniature moments, then you pull it together as a whole experience for BBC Three, back then on television, and in iPlayer. We proved the short form part, right? We got over 1 to 3 million views for the disaggregated sketches. But we couldn't get the TV show commissioned, because people who commission TV shows only understand television. Well, they certainly did then, and to a certain extent, that's all they understand now. So you couldn't make this work because essentially the BBC was saying that the internet exists to develop television shows. And that is why, in the end, we sort of fell out of love. So, I left the BBC last year, and I ran away to the circus, or as we would call it, the DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. So I've been working as a civil servant. Well, not really, but I went to work with the government on a review of the digital capability of the UK's cultural sector. That's almost £1 billion worth of annual investment into theatres, galleries, museums, and so on. And that's the culture minister, John Glenn. They're like buses. We had 3 of the buggers in a year, all right? 3 different culture ministers in a year. And he's at Digital Catapult, which is just down the road from Euston Station, right? Government funded, innovation lab, and currently has an exciting immersive studio. So we were trying to persuade the culture minister to experience and put money behind new forms of immersive technologies and the sorts of content you could create with them. And that's now happened. And the work that I did will report in March. My most recent gig, I've just got back from Nigeria, where I've been working with African broadcasters on the shift to storytelling on mobile. So the idea that here's a fact for you, right? In the UK, the average age of the population is 40. Right? In Nigeria, the average age of the population is 18 years old. Africa is the fastest, youngest growing demographic in the world. Right? They've completely skipped the internet on any other device other than a mobile phone. Nigeria has 26 million people in Lagos, 182 million people in the country, and they are all moving to consumption of content over mobile devices, which when you are running radio networks or television networks is something you better be aware of and understand how you're going to adapt to that change. The only thing stopping that country from moving forward with content consumption at scale is the cost of data. Because everything that you use on your mobile costs quite a lot of money in terms of data charges. And they're not rich, but they are getting invested into very, very quickly, largely by the Chinese. So that's my story, all right? I work digitally because I think this is the most exciting place now to tell stories. And that's the only reason I work digitally, really, is I'm a storyteller. I come to this kind of content experience because of what you can do with it, how you can affect people, the most amazing ways in which you can tell stories. And if you are going to get into journalism or publishing or most forms of content, you cannot escape now the huge shift in audience behaviours and how you need to adapt in what you do in order to get a job, and how the business you're working with will have to adapt in order to stay in business. People struggle sometimes to define what it means to work digitally. That's the best definition I've come across, and that's from a man called Tom Loosemore. And Tom helped design the government's digital service. He now runs a lot of digital development for the Co-op. And I do what I do, as I say, because digital technologies, to me, are the most exciting way to tell stories now. So, let's talk about where we are in the media landscape. That is a screenshot of my TV set. Right? So my TV set is now just a series of apps that you navigate through. I don't know, I'm guessing your TV home screen looks a bit like that. Media theory. Hopefully you guys are all up to speed on this. So, how did media used to work? Right? Media used to work, and how you used to make money was the creatives had production companies that they'd sell content through to networks who had channels that became distributors that you watched the devices on the content that they'd produced, and your role as audiences was just to consume this shit, right? That worked brilliantly. That worked fantastically well for so many years until the internet came along. Now, it's been unbound. This is from a presentation by a company called Redef, who do insight and analytics into content consumption for largely television channels and television companies. We now have an environment where you skip from this to this. Every single one of you is has the potential to be a creator. Every single one of you has the potential now to reach audiences at scale just via your mobile phones, right? That has changed quite a lot. Monetization models are still certainly to a certain extent sticking where they are. But this fundamental shift means that relationships with broadcasters and everything else has to change. And it is. Essentially, what we're doing now is we're all fighting for the currency of attention. So your competition is no longer Sky or ITV or Channel 4. Your competition is pictures of cows photobombing horses in fields, right? Because we're all competing for the currency of attention. We all want to grab your attention and retain your attention. And the reality is audiences now are fragmenting, right? So what you have is a very healthy television business, still very robust, but generally very old. So most BBC TV content is watched by audiences over the age of 55. So BBC One, I think, has an average age of 60. So does BBC Two, even older, right? Those demographics are shoring up what's happening behind, which is massive change in the way younger audiences now consume their content. And it isn't just this form of content, right? The choices are huge. So it's gaming, it's social content, it's all forms of content experience, largely navigated through by mobile devices, or if you're in the premium content landscape like drama, comedy, high-end factual, those are now global commodities, right? So a case in point, have you seen The Crown on Netflix? Anyone seen The Crown? Right, The Crown was a production by a company called Left Bank. Left Bank had that idea and had it ready to pitch to ITV. Netflix came in, took the deal off the table, offered them hundreds of millions of pounds in order to exclusively grab all the rights to that proposition on a global basis. And the traditional model would be you sell your show to ITV in the UK, then you license it to NBC in the States and to another channel in South Africa. That model's starting to disappear because of huge global commodities like Netflix and Amazon, and will soon be Apple as well. So the world's shifting. So where would you like to focus next if you think the world is shifting? What is the most interesting space to be in right now in terms of content creation? Now, I'm going to play something which is a little bit still future shaping. But this is the world right now of mixed reality. So the idea of immersive content, are you familiar with the ideas of virtual reality, augmented and mixed reality? You know what I mean when I say those things, right? The last guy talking there is a guy called Sol Rogers. Sol talked here. He runs one of the UK's most well-regarded immersive production studios. It's based no more than 6-7 miles from here in St Albans, right? This world is a very exciting and fast-moving world. I was at an event on Friday. There's about to be a government investment, £33 million, into the creation and development of immersive content in the UK. It's rapidly growing. It's going to scale in all sorts of interesting ways over the next 5 to 7 years. If I were you, and I didn't know yet where I wanted to put my focus, I'd be looking very, very closely at this world. It's lacking people with high degrees of creative and technical skill set. It's already eating into some forms of entertainment, but at the moment it's viable mainly in this area, business-to-business stuff. But it's really interesting because no one knows the rules, no one knows what good stories really should be in that world, and it's all up for grabs, right? And I'm thinking, if I was your age and I wanted to do something, I'd want to do something where I knew I could probably run it in a couple of years' time. Telly, forget it. You've got a whole hierarchy to get through. Do it if you want to do it. I'm just saying, for me, that's a really exciting space to be in. Bear in mind, though, that the world of digital technologies and content moves really quickly, and nothing you think you know lasts forever, right? This is a very wise man. It's absolutely true. Digital solutions will last forever or for 5 years, whichever comes first. Everything you thought you knew, you didn't know a few years ago. You have to constantly stay over things that are changing, right? A couple of years ago, we all thought Snapchat was it, right? Does anyone think Snapchat's it still? Yeah? No? I don't know. I think as a business model, Instagram are about going to eat them alive. How you do this kind of stuff, how you stay ahead of the game, This is a platform we launched for the BBC. I launched this for the BBC, which is an innovation hub, and it allows you to think differently about how you tell stories, how you get analytics back from audiences. We celebrated our third birthday this year. It's an interesting platform. Go and have a look at it. It tells you quite interesting stuff about what's happening in content right now. So, for example, one of the most interesting things right now, I'd say, is the reinvention of audio. Audio, all of a sudden, is sexy again. And the reason audio is sexy again is partly for probably two reasons. The first is because a lot of internet search is going via audio, Siri, Alexa, Cortana, that kind of thing. And a lot of the companies managing that form of tech are making that tech open source, so you can do interesting things with it. So you can do interactive stories for the Amazon Alexa. We made one for that platform called the Inspection Chamber. I don't know if you have an Alexa, or if you have this kind of stuff, but it's really interesting as to what you can do with them now. The other interesting thing about audio is podcasting, and how podcasting is changing a lot of what's possible. Right, so stay over what's happening. Really keep an eye on what other people are doing, and have a look at the stuff on that website if you won't. I won't play the video. Okay, absolutely nuts and bolts advice. Just shit you should know, right? If you want to find a career in the media and you want to understand some of the interesting stuff that's happening, read books. Read books like Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky. Really interesting treatise on what happens when you democratize technologies. Read Creativity Inc., the inside story of what happened at Pixar, how Pixar got to be such a huge production house. They have a brains trust where they run their ideas through. They are a fascinating company. How do you get that successful? How do you never release a turkey? All right, Cars 2 was a bit iffy. The Tao of Pooh. The only reason the Tao of Pooh is in there is it's one of the best books I ever read, and it told me a lot about myself, right? And I'm just saying, read. You have to consume, you have to understand other people's ideas before you can really understand how to contribute in this kind of incredibly crowded marketplace. You have to read a lot, all right? Understand the market you want to get into. If you are thinking about journalism and the understanding of what's happening in journalism, follow Nick Newman. Nick Newman is a man with a brain the size of a planet who does a lot of interesting insight work for Reuters. Every year he publishes a digital news report for Reuters. Every year it's publicly available. Read it, understand what he's saying, so you can then work out how you're going to have a USP in the marketplace. Listen to the media show. Radio 4's media show is available as a podcast every week. If you want to get into the media, you have to consume and understand the media. Understand, if you want to work on the internet, Mary Meeker's Internet Trends Report, issued annually, used by a variety of companies in terms of insight and analytics. Follow interesting people on social media, all right? By which I mean people like Benedict Evans. Benedict Evans is an analyst for Andreessen Horowitz, which are one of the biggest VC companies in the world. They put shitloads of cash into platforms like Uber, all kinds of interesting things. Every week, Benedict releases a newsletter about what's happening on the internet, what he's seeing, what he's investing into. All of this is publicly available, right? You have to do your homework. You have to understand what's happening in the market. You have to digest. You have to understand things. In terms of reading, one of the things I would definitely try and get to is why is it we work in the media, right? The media isn't somewhere you necessarily go to make a lot of money. You can make good money if you have your own company, but generally journalism isn't either an area you go into to make money. So understand why it is you want to do this for a living. Really think about, what kind of person am I? Why do I get up in the morning and go to work? What is it I want to do? I get a kick out of this idea of telling stories and influencing people. And there's a really interesting piece of essay writing that compared Aldous Huxley's Brave New World with George Orwell's 1984. And it's about the way in which people are either getting media that's so banal it stops them from questioning the world, or it's about George Orwell's theory that people have books taken away from them. If you haven't read Brave New World and you haven't read 1984, do so. And the only other thing I'd say is, before I came here, I asked some friends of mine on LinkedIn what advice would they give people who wanted to pursue a career in the media. And if we like, we can go through some of that advice. And these are from people like the guys who run Interactive for BBC Children's, or people who run development for independent production companies. I can tell you it, but it essentially boils down to a few things. One, don't say you want to be in the media, you are the media, all right? You guys can all run channels yourselves. You can all create social platforms. You can all probably create your own podcasts. Don't tell anybody you want to be in the media. Start making, start doing, start creating. And a guy I know who's a very influential creative technologist said something that I think I don't quite agree with. But he said, qualifications are worthless. Your portfolio is invaluable. To a certain extent, he's right. When I used to hire people for jobs, I didn't really care too much about the qualifications that they had. I was much more interested in what they'd made, what they'd done, what skill sets they had. Case in point, I'm not going to employ anyone if you don't have a driving license. If you have to go on a shoot, I'm not going to pay for two of you, right? So if you don't have a driving license and you want to work in the media, think about it, all right? I also would like you to have a language, because quite often I can't speak a language, and I'm expecting you to if I want to do stuff in a foreign country. I also expect you to have a ridiculously high technical skill set, because there's no reason you can't do everything on Photoshop. You can't do everything on editing. My 11-year-old son is better editing video than I am, right? He makes videos all the time, right? So you better come into a room with a very high degree of technical proficiency. And most importantly, you better understand my business. You better understand and devour everything I've produced, written, broadcast. If you go to an interview and you don't understand what that company makes or broadcasts or does, no one would give you a job. And I'm only trying to be honest, because I know I've interviewed shitloads of people and not given them jobs. And their basics are so easy to get right. That's it. Now then, would you like to get into any areas I haven't covered? So the specific stuff that is about you and your careers, because we've got a bit of time. Do you want to ask some questions?
I read on the study map thing that you did something with Graham Norton.
Yes.
And the map.
Do you want to know?
Yeah.
All right. I gave Graham Norton his first gig when he was in very early on, and he worked with me on a radio show on Radio 5. And Graham and I got to know each other, and I ended up, when I was working with Mark and Lard, writing for his Channel 4 show for a day a week. And writing was a euphemism for actually doing research. So back in the dial-up days of the internet, around 98-9, my job was to find some of the dirty, pervy stuff that he would do phone calls about. So I used to have to research things and found things like I found men who were turned on by wearing radiation suits. I found men who were turned on by watching women's legs on a car accelerator, yeah, and push pedals. Anyway, I'm not proud of it, but I did it. And Graham's one of the nicest, most talented people you could ever wish to work with. But that's just a showbiz anecdote. Come on, what kind of advice would you like in terms of if you want to progress, if you want to choose the media as a career? What would be most useful to you?
I've got a question. Because we've got students who study creative writing, and I'm wondering, is there some sort of target length of time of a piece of writing they could do as a screenplay or a YouTube video or something that they should aim for as, okay, this is my taster, my three-minute long dialogue or something?
If you're interested in writing, write. Don't think about how the writing translates to another platform. Think about how people consume writing. I don't have the courage to actually type an internet browser again, so I'll leave it alone. But if you look at a piece of publishing software called Shorthand, all right, it's Australian-based publishing software. It's really interesting because I don't know how many of you read periodicals like Wired or Fast Company or any of the things online that are essentially kind of long journalism reads, right? Now the challenge with writing on and digital is people tend not to do a lot of long reading, you know. We are in the landscape of very short attention spans. But shorthand's interesting because it shows you how you can showcase very long reads with fascinating use of graphics, video and so on. But if you are interested in writing, pursue it. Pursue it for the love of it, pursue it for the skill of it, pursue it because it may give you enjoyment and it may ultimately lead to some form of being paid to write, but do it because you want to do it and have something to say. And I think that's the most interesting thing about the media as well. You need to have a voice, you need to have something to contribute. People who write tend to have that. People who write and want to write tend to have something to say, otherwise why are they writing? Any other questions? Anything? Radio, telly, whatever? Yeah.
I think most of us are on the same course, but our course sort of is very broad, so we do like lots of different stuff. So we do radio, we do film, we do animation, and I always feel like when I go for graduate jobs, etc., and I say I'll go for radio, for example, I had 12 weeks experience or TV, 12, you know, and then I'm up against people that studied 3 years on that course. So I just feel like, do you ever employ people that have that broad knowledge of different transferable
Are you all,
skills?
is it undergraduates? Are you undergraduate?
Graduates.
Yeah, right, okay, look. No one's going to look at an undergraduate degree and go, oh, you only did radio for 12 weeks. Oh, they've done it for 3 years. Most people are not going to look at an undergraduate qualification and go, I'm going to employ you because you did that. They're going to employ you because of what you bring to the table, what you did in your spare time. How many times did you actually then go and work on or help contribute to your local radio station? How did you get a podcast off the ground? How did you go and make something happen, right? It's not really about what you study. The media is much more now, it's really about what you've made, what you can do. I don't think there's anything that would stop you from getting a job if you've only studied something for 12 weeks, because you have it in your gift to go away and make that thing in your own time. And if you haven't done it in your own time, if you've only done radio for 12 weeks and that's all you've got coming to the table, you may well get passed over for other people, not because they've got more academic experience, because they may have something to bring because, you know, they were a runner at some radio station in the summer. Anything else? Yes?
Yes. Regarding working experience while you're in the university, which would you think is more valuable in the employer's eye? Say if you were to run something of your own for like over the years when you're studying a degree, or working an internship for a few years in a bigger company, which would be more valuable in the employer's eye, would you say?
I'm going to chicken out and say both. Whilst you're here, you should be doing stuff in your own time anyway, right? So when how many hours a week are you guys actually booked into lectures? Of let's say a 40-hour week, how many hours lectures are you actually having to attend?
Like 10 hours.
Right. So by my math, you've got 30 hours that you should be doing shit in, right? Obviously, you've got to do your study, your writing. If you want to be in the media and you're not using at least a third of that time to find something that relates to the career you want to have, then how on earth are you expecting to have a career? That may be the thing you can do yourself. So if you don't all have your own WordPress sites, why? If you don't have places where you can showcase your own video, why don't you? You should have. And with regard to the internship stuff, the value will lie in your ability to make yourself available for a protracted period of time. So that might mean targeting people specifically because they may want you over a certain period. So target people over the summer, or target people specifically shows that may have something happening at the weekend. Saturdays and Sundays, I've never worked around here for 3 Counties Radio or any of the commercial guys. My hunch is they have quite a lot of gaps at the weekend. So you target people subject to your availability and the fact that you can offer somebody a certain service for quite a long period of time, because people hate getting interns in if they have to then train another one in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah? All right. Any more? I'm very happy to stay till you guys want me to. So, any questions at all about? Yep.
Whenever we talk about journalism, we often tend to talk journalism in regards to how to sell the story to the people, and journalism is often talked in relation to the money and the profit. But I want your opinion that in today's era, is journalism more tilted towards making money, or it's more tilted towards just selling the story and not really having any sort of social impact on the society, or just ignoring the social aspect or the social responsibilities?
Some organisations have to turn a profit in order to stay in existence. In fact, most media organisations have to do that. In the UK, we're very lucky because the BBC is a state-funded public service broadcaster. It doesn't have to turn a profit. You just have to pay your television licence or your iPlayer licence, whatever it is now, and you get the BBC for free or for a relatively low rate. And I think it's very interesting to see quite recently why Facebook has pivoted in terms of its change, because people don't trust a lot of news that they read online. That's the truth of it. They tend to have quite a high degree of skepticism, and you need trusted and valuable news sources for a healthy democracy. So you need the BBC, you need the New York Times, you need CNN, you need these kind of behemoths in order to have credibility and kind of like validation in a universe where you don't know if what you believe is true, because platforms are being gamed. I think the challenge lies in the fact that the monetization models for a lot of these old media organizations are tough. When you think about how Facebook works, or you think about how Google works, you have to have trusted news sources, whether or not you have them because they're free or you have them because the New York Times is one of the most advanced, really trusted news sources, and it's for profit. The BBC the same, and it's not. You have to have people you know you can trust, right? Sorry, did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to become a news presenter.
A news presenter?
Yeah, I do watch the news a lot.
Yeah?
I don't often see people like me on there, and it kind of does knock down our confidence. Do you think society is more open?
I think certainly the BBC's had a bit of an issue with diversity, and it's trying to tackle that right now. And I think there are certainly ways in, if that's your preferred career route. The BBC has diversity champions, and I don't know if you know of an organisation called Creative Skill Set, and its job is to get people into interesting jobs. And it has a diverse element to it. It prioritizes areas of like portrayal. There's also organisations like the Mama Youth Trust, whose job is to get young, especially disenfranchised audiences from a class poverty point of view into the media. So I think lots and lots of work is trying to be done. But you're right, I think there's probably an issue with people not being able to see themselves in the media. And I would argue, look, don't tell me you want to be a news presenter, be a news presenter. Start your YouTube channel, get working on something that gives you the skill set that you can learn, so that by the time you're ready to have a conversation with a news provider, you can show them what you can do. So do things that will help you get where you want to get to.
Well, I think we'd all like to thank Will for a fantastic presentation. I strongly advise you all to compare notes afterwards, because by my reckoning there was at least one fantastic piece of advice for every 2 minutes that Will was talking today. So it's impossible that you've all written them all down or that you're going to remember them. So by all means, I think you should discuss this later, and I'll certainly be reminding you about some of the hints there. It's worth keeping in mind when we're talking about people getting involved in the media right from the undergraduate level. Just 2 years ago, I had a pair of students in my first year, And I think within 3 weeks of induction week, I learnt that actually one of them was struggling a bit. They had their own sports YouTube channel and were interviewing famous boxers and things, and it was going very successfully as their mini industry alongside their undergraduate studies. So there are lots of things happening there, and probably, I'm sure you would find amongst yourselves that there are lots of different avenues that you're pursuing. So I'll let you go now, because I'm sure we'll start.